that you were able to make it and join us for GARD, and I'll let you take it away.
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Chelsea, for organizing this. Thank you so much, Dr. Vanjie, for bringing together this fantastic community. I'm really excited to participate in this way this year, as I was able to participate last year, as an attendee, as a participant. So I'm really happy to be able to meet with, the whole community in this way. So let me go ahead and share my screen, and I'll just assume that this is going to work out. You all can tell me if it's not showing up properly. But this is what I'll be discussing here today: informed entrepreneurship, researching business models on the open web. And I plan to speak for about, about 40 minutes or so, and then leave time for questions. And so I kind of broke this down into top tips, so looking at things to really keep in mind as you're sort of using the internet to research business models, to learn more about the possibilities around your innovation. We're going to look at these tips, and Dr. Vanjie was kind enough to let me use some of her work as a jumping off point for examples, to kind of give you some sense of what this could look like for this given project. And then I want you to be thinking about how this could work for your organization, work for your sort of innovation that you're thinking of, bringing to market or bringing to impacting people. And I know sometimes there can be some, hesitancy to think in terms of business terms, because, you might not be primarily motivated by profits or by your own personal enrichment, but I do find that business terminology can be very helpful for making sure that you're thinking about all of the factors that are necessary to bring an innovation into the public market so that it can impact the people that you really want to impact. So I will be using business terminology more generally. And my objectives for you all today are that those that are going to be able to watch this, will be able to effectively develop a better understanding of the environment with their innovation might interact with as a business, and that you'll be able to use this general approach, but as well as the specific sources and types of sources that are going to be routinely useful for open business research. So the kinds of things we'll be looking at are, industries and business models, customers, competitors, supply chains, and partnerships. These are all the sorts of things that can be better informed by an effective web search strategy. And one of the things I'm not going to be discussing is specific subscription databases that certain universities may subscribe to, or public or private companies might subscribe to, or even governments or other organizations may have access to some really great subscription-based tools. And we do use these sometimes in coursework, but I'm not going to be focusing on these today because not everybody in the audience is going to have access to those same things. So I'm going to be looking for the open web. So as I said, I'm using keyword tips as my sort of organizing device. So my first tip today is for you all to pay attention to the keywords you're using to look for information. And as researchers and scholars, this is going to be very familiar for you, that you're already thinking in terms of subjects, you're already thinking in terms of how to organize information. But it's just applying that kind of base of knowledge of how to use keywords to other new disciplines when you're doing open web research. And, the types of places that you might find relevant information to better understand your business model might be in books or popular articles from magazines. That could be in blog posts, that could be in databases, scientific literature, so many different sources. But across all of these different types of sources, Keywords are going to be the way that you can find that information. So when I use the term keyword, I'm using the fourth definition here. This is from dictionary.com. In digital technology, a word used to classify or organize digital content or to facilitate an online search for information. So it's really that last part, what is going to help you facilitate your own search for information. And as you're thinking about, a business concept, these keywords can occur or represent many different aspects of your business concept. It's really almost any aspect that you're trying to learn more about could have a variety of keywords that would reflect that you're trying to learn more about. So it could be the type of industry that you're interested in competing with or participating in. That could include an industry code, like we use the NAICS codes here in the United States. It could be a particular production process, technology, even the measurement that you might be looking at. And then it could be relevant groups of individuals or organizations, trade groups, competitor groups, government regulators, funders. So as you're thinking about how to find information, and how, as you're going from, let's say you have a scientific article that you've published, how can you go through that and find the relevant keywords that are going to fall into these different areas? You want to be pulling those out. And this is something that you all can consider, and we can do this, as in the chat right now if people have responses for this. But I know a lot of people are going to be watching this asynchronously, so this is something for you to practice. And as I work with classes, it's huge emphasis is, okay, practice creating the keywords that typify your innovation, that typify aspects of your business model or your customer segment. Make sure you're collecting and refining your keywords over time. So I'd like to use the example now. And these are two articles that were shared with me around a specific set of innovations. And as I read through the articles, I was kind of looking for, what can I highlight? What can I use to search for more information, to discover more information about this? And a lot of times as I'm working with entrepreneurs, as I'm working with a new business opportunity, we'll start building this document, and right up top is what are the keywords we're going to use. And as we're continuing to pull in new sources and bring new things in, the list of keywords grows and grows, but it's important to be making sure we're keeping track of that. So for this opportunity, the first keywords that I was sort of looking at and highlighting were obviously going to be tuberculosis, but also rapid tests, diagnostics, biosensors, World Health Organization, and also World Health Organization recommended, that sort of term of art around the specific technologies that they advocate for. And then a competitor technology expert, that it's important to highlight those and bring those out, as well as a specific technology or measurement, SSM. So that's sort of the first key tip. And that's going to seem obvious to a lot of people, as well as this one might as well. But tip 2 is to begin thinking about using a business framework, and you would be doing this for the disciplines that you're already an expert in, but it's something that I think is useful as you're beginning your business research as well. And that's to, help you as you're collecting information, and it feels like, oh my gosh, it's the whole internet is relevant and every piece of information is relevant. How can I organize this? Well, it's useful to begin developing a few business frameworks that you're familiar with, and that you can begin creating rudimentary organizations of your documents that split things into different categories. So as you're finding relevant sources, okay, how can I put that into a relevant place in this document, using, a table of contents and that sort of thing. So I'm going to bring forward 4 that I think are particularly useful, and just explain a little bit about why I think they're useful and why you might consider using them. So the first one is the value proposition canvas. And this is used a lot of times as a visual graphic organizer, but it really emphasizes, what do you know about your customer or the person that's making the decision of whether or not to use your innovation? And then how are you sort of making an appeal to that person by making their life, their job easier and better? And how are you appealing to what they're motivated by? What do they value? And how are you matching up to that? And kind of making very clear the match of their values and what you can help with. So that value proposition canvas, I think, is fundamental for a lot of people who are interested in technology transfer, because it can be a simple way to make sure you're kind of checking your work and saying, like, am I thinking in terms of making an appeal, making a pitch to improve people's lives? The second one is related to the value proposition canvas, and that is the business model canvas. And it's still internal to a business, but it's looking at breaking down 9 different segments that every business and nonprofits as well, but these are aspects of the business that need to be considered, whether it's key partnerships or how are we going to maintain relationships with our customers. What are our revenue generators, and what are our costs? So it's just 9 different segments. I won't list anymore. I've listed enough. But it really helps you think about how are all of the moving parts of my business integrating with one another? How are they affecting one another? And once again, it's a graphic organizer, so it's a single page where you can really begin jotting down ideas and thinking about how all these things affect one another. But they can also, once you're familiar with the terms and the ideas, be useful ways to kind of chunk, like, oh, this is an innovation I'm learning about from this related business or organization or hospital group. This is some aspect that they're doing really well, and I can apply that to my business idea. So let me put that link or a note here in this document relating to the business model canvas and helping me organize all of my information search activities. So far, value proposition canvas, business model canvas, these are internal to the organization. Um, with 5 forces, we start to look external to the organization and consider our competitors. And what really defines a competitor is, sharing these different aspects, sharing the same competition, sharing what new entrants you might be competing with, who your suppliers are and what their sort of landscape looks like, likewise for customers, and then substitute products as well. So as you're thinking about how does an industry work, these are questions you want to start considering. So it's the 5 forces, Porter's 5 forces. So if you're starting to really think in that sort of strategic, competitive environment, these might be ways for you to organize your notes around that. And the last one I want to mention is even more external to that. It's the sort of total environment within which you might be operating. And that's PESTLE, political, economic, social, technological, legal, environmental. So those are all the different, factors that might really impact your strategy, but maybe that's a useful framework for keeping track of those notes as you're doing your research. So I don't really want you necessarily to, begin using all of these at once, but perhaps there's one that resonates with you, and that you might want to go learn more about as a way to sort of organize your notes. So tip number 3 is who cares? And this is a practice that I'm sure you all are already getting in the practice of thinking through. Is what are the organizations that care about this topic, and how can I learn what they're doing and learn from them to learn who they're interacting with. So these could be, and you'll all will have different answers for this, what organizations are really going to care about your grand challenge that you're addressing. But they could be think tanks, consultancy companies, competitors. And each of these types of organizations is going to publish different information and sort of share different things about the topic that you're interested in. But think tanks are one I really like to start with in a lot of cases, especially when you're looking at international contexts, when you're looking at pardon me, when you're looking at, health-related contexts. So there is this list, and the last version of it was published in 2020, and unfortunately, it may be the last version ever, as one of the lead authors, James McGann, passed away in that year. So it's possible that this is an artifact that won't be updated anymore, but it had been, going back decades and decades. But it is this list of think tanks broken down by geography, broken down by area that they're specializing in. And if, like me, you're kind of coming into an area that's new to you, it's very useful for better understanding who's active in this space. So that resource is a 350-page PDF. I won't look at it right now, but it is broken down by the sort of chapters of content areas. And they have this list of top global health policy think tanks. So I went through, and using tuberculosis is that that easy top line keyword. I sort of went through and found a couple that were relevant. And I did the first sort of 8 and just did site searches based on the names of those organizations. And Brookings had the most relevant content. And then I kind of knew, of course, that the Gates Foundation is active in this space as well. So you of course can use that, your past experience, as well as what do they have listed there. So Brookings did have some relevant information, but I found that Gates was the most fruitful of the 10 or so that I looked at of these think tanks. And this is a good example of why it's helpful to already have, let's say, a Word document or a Google document, some place where you're already collecting your notes, collecting your links, making sure you're giving yourself enough breadcrumbs to be able to follow back through your research process. Because as I go to the Gates Foundation, I search for tuberculosis, and I see one of their strategic goals is new diagnostic tools. So this is directly linked to the research and the potential innovation and impact that we were looking at. So going from there, I look at their partners, and I find these 2 different partners that seemed a little bit more relevant than some of the others that were more focused on vaccines and not diagnostics. And then I found these specific documents. And this to me is where it's like, oh, okay, this is fruitful, because these are the types of documents that really might help me better understand, I'm putting myself now in the shoes of the researcher, the innovator, who's looking to maximize the impact here. These types of documents are going to help me better understand what might be a successful business model, who might be partners to work with, what might be those environmental factors that you'd get in a PESTLE framework, political, legal, what are some of the things in the broader environment that might impact success. And you experts in the field, you would have a lot of this already known or internalized, but you also probably have gaps. So of course you're trying to understand better and better what are the ways to increase the impact here. So as I sort of dug into these specific documents, these are the kind of things that may be very relevant depending upon where you are in your journey. But the case detection, case studies, book had a great set of examples of implementations in many different countries and what were the major costs across those different implementations. So those are all excellent things for excellent case studies to build from for thinking about what's an effective business model and how are you going to reach people, who are you going to partner with, and of course that changes from country to country. But this is a great way to sort of push forward your thinking and advance and iterate on that business model. And then in the second document, Medical Diagnostics in Brazil, the market landscape assessment, this was from a very different perspective. And it was a lot of, I think that a major stakeholder for the production of this was actually the organization of companies that do diagnostics as their revenue generating activity, as their business. So they have a wholly different perspective, but it had a very sophisticated layout of what is the current environment, the current testing environment. What are their interactions like with hospitals, with doctors, with private doctors, with clinics, all these different ways, and a fairly frank assessment of where they see opportunity for growth, which is something that you can, compare from and say like, okay, well, this is essentially a potential partner, but also a potential competitor. What are they doing? Where can we fit in? How can we, use this knowledge that they're sharing here to, develop that understanding of a business model? So that was all tip 3 under who cares, but it has that something that I really emphasize is pulling the thread, of course, and you do this all the time as a researcher, both in going to the works cited, but also in snowballing interview participants, right? Or like, oh, maybe somebody that knows somebody, and just continuing to develop. Well, it's a very similar pathway here where you're saying like, okay, well, maybe this article will link to something else, and giving yourself the opportunity to go back through then and find the information that's really going to help you. So tip 4 is a little bit different. It's power search, which is actually a term that Google uses. They have courses in power search. You can find them on the internet by searching for power search in Google. And it's a term that I use to sort of say like, yes, use Google. I don't mind people using Google, of course, as a complementary tool. It's great for finding information. Of course, it has its limitations, but it's a tool that works better if you kind of use filters and kind of narrow in on what you're really looking for. So some of my favorite ways to narrow in are 1, to use full quotes to kind of lock your phrase in, and to search by PDF and kind of limit in that way. Site search with edu or gov, or a country specific site search. You can do all those things with the site ending, and then your publish date as well. And so an example of what this could look like is, tuberculosis rapid test market report consultancy, which, maybe that's just gobbledygook, or like those aren't the keywords I should be using, which is almost certainly the case. But you can see if you limit to file type PDF, you're only going to start, you get reports back. It really changes. And I think the same can be true of PowerPoint, PPT, but these are reports that are kind of published to a different level from these organizations as compared to a blog post. It's more formal than a website or a blog post. And tip number 5 here, and this one I'll go into a little bit greater depth with, is alerts. So you can see this bird is on high alert. It's letting all the other birds know what's going on here. And that, once you find those organizations that you want to start keeping track of, and this includes those keywords that you want to start keeping track of, the internet's quite good at it's something that we as internet users, as organizations, have gotten better and better about, is how can we keep track of the things that we care about. And there's a few options. Google News alerts can be very helpful for certain things. Web of Science, you can automate, oh, if somebody cites my work, can you let me know? And they publish something. But a Web of Science is subscription based. Specific organizations will also, that's another way. Of course, you might want to be judicious about, what email address you're using. Occasionally, organizations will set up, essentially a subscription only email address so that they can receive all of this information and then search through it purposefully. And then Open Zotero and other citation management tools, and I mentioned that is, one thing you can do is set up a small community, set up an Open Zotero, and then have everybody sharing their citations on almost a shared web page. And that can be very useful, especially for websites or things that may seem more ephemeral. And you just integrate your citation management tool into your web browser and then say like, oh, okay, this blog post is relevant. Let me create an entry on our shared Zotero or on my desktop Zotero. But this is a way, I guess it's not technically an alert, but this is a way to keep track and share across a small community. But the top one that I mentioned here, I think is a very interesting tool, and I wanted to highlight it and talk about how it could be used in this context. So lens.org, which I don't know enough about its history to know how prominent it is or how long they've been active in this space, but I've only been really using it over the past couple years, past year or so. And it is a free to use, free to set up an account to manage your searches and for it to remember your searches. And then once you've created a saved search, you can automate alerts. So earlier today, this is just something I was working on as an example for today, was to say, okay, we're going to look at scholarly entries. Tuberculosis and testing as our two keywords, and then you can also filter for funders. So this is subject to some inconsistency in how people will enter their data, but Gates Foundation and several variants of that, right? And then you can get these scholarly works. And so I created essentially this as a dynamic collection so that it auto updates the query, and then it will send me alerts when new scholarly works qualify for this. You can also have the option as a list here of a static collection where you're saying, oh no, these are handpicked, and those won't be automatically updating. But I'll go ahead and click through the link here. And so this is the persistent link for this set of saved searches. And you can see it's this link or it's this list of these entries. Now, what I haven't done today is to check enough about, okay, so if you have access via, let's say, Michigan State University libraries, what happens when can you integrate this with that tool so that you can get all the access that you would normally get? And Google Scholar does have that as an option. But nevertheless, you can get this, listed by all of these different sorts of information. And it could be useful too for learning about what organization activity you're seeing. So I want to share this as a potentially powerful and free tool for you all to use to be aware of the scholarly research that is out there. But it can also be useful for, as it says under our apps, patents is another possibility here. So that I haven't done like a side-by-side comparison to other patent search applications, but it is free. It's pulling from many sources internationally on patents. And I think as a preliminary searching tool, I'm not a patent lawyer, so this isn't something I can speak to with any kind of professional authority, but nevertheless, it's a very useful tool for being aware of what's happening in your field. And for the tuberculosis search that we were looking at, I did use Expert at one point, which is one of those competitor technologies, and was able to set up an alert for CFID, the patent holder's activity, and see, okay, what are they doing going forward? Or if there's activity with that current patent, who's citing it, and getting a regular report based on that. So again, lens.org, I think it's worth, sort of being aware of and potentially using if it kind of fits your needs. So that's lens.org, great way to set up alerts and kind of stay abreast of what's happening in your space. So I'd be very interested for you all to consider answering this question in whatever way you see fit. If it's just, saying it out loud to yourself, that's great. But if you want to let me know, feel free to email me. For those of you who are here right now, what did I miss? What are the great ways that you all have for learning about your specific business models, and to really round out your understanding of how to research a topic? So these were my 5 tips for today, just as a review. Number 1, pay close attention to your keywords. Number 2, consider using a business framework, something that is going to help you organize your research, and also begin using that vocabulary in a consistent way that you can also talk to other people about what your strategy is, about what you're seeing in the total environment. Tip number 3, ask yourself, who cares? Keep track of those organizations that care. I didn't get deep into this, but sometimes you have a consultancy like McKinsey that they almost have like pet issues that they pay a lot of attention to. And if you know what consultancies are paying close attention to your topic, then you can stay abreast of some activity from them. And they tend to look at things from a perspective of business models, of what's the value chain, and how are we looking at things at a global level, but also how's it getting all the way down towards what we're looking to impact. Tip number 4, power search. So think about how you're using the search tools that you are using, how can you use them most effectively? And number 5, once you do find those organizations that you really want to keep track of, how are you setting up alerts? How are you staying abreast from those organizations? So with that, I'll wrap things up. My name is Terrence O'Neill. Just anybody who's watching this, if you'd like to reach out, you'd like to further this discussion, you'd like to talk about how this research works at a place like Michigan State University, but also how it works in other, areas that of the world that, are just organized differently or have different library resources, or, don't have the same coverage of some of these topics. I'm really interested in how to effectively support entrepreneurs in the varied settings of where we're seeing needs. So my email is there, oneilt@msu.edu. And thanks for your attention. And with that, I will see if we have any questions.
Can I ask a question, Terrence?
Yes, please. I see we have one in the chat, but we will get to that one second. Yes, please go ahead.
So one of the common resource that is needed for the business understanding of the business is the market size.
Yeah.
But it's very hard to get this books or references on market size because they're very expensive, right? One book I think is like 2,000 plus or 5,000 sometimes. Does the library, MSU library, have these books?
Yes, so it does, and it also depends a great deal on the specifics. So if I go back to, apologies for my fast clicking here. But this is really something that I do spend a lot of time with when I talk to classes, and that I do help people search for these. You know, these are three providers of these kinds of reports through the library. And so at Michigan State University, the library is responsible for, you know, managing subscriptions for these databases. And sometimes there are limitations as to whether or not they're appropriate for technology transfer as opposed to educational usage, even though they're very clearly business databases relevant for entrepreneurs. But especially these resources are valuable for generating those market size figures, and getting especially those large, broad figures, and figuring out how then to narrow in on what the relevant number is. And they can, a lot of times they're a starting point. You know, they're never going to be perfect for what your total addressable market is, but they're going to be a good starting point. It is a need for pretty much every pitch deck, and it is always something that people are challenged by, and they expect it to be a perfect number. But I think a lot of times what, you know, again, I can speak from my experience. I don't, you know, I haven't talked to investment bankers for decades or anything along those lines. But my understanding is they want to see your thinking. You know, it's kind of like a show your work situation. How much do you understand the global need around this space? And how much do you understand who exactly you want to work with, and how you're going to reach that audience? You know, how many people are at the end of that value chain that you want to work with? So yes, these databases are great for that. And also, you know, there's that it's almost the beginning of the work if you find those numbers.
Yeah. So do we have to go to the library, or is there like digital online that we can say, can I have an access to this?
Oh, yes. Yes, you can use your net ID and password to access those, and to, you know, I can exit out here and just to give a sense of this. And for those of you that aren't at MSU, you're saying, hey, I don't care, but you may have libraries that also serve you in some fashion. You may have librarians that you can reach out to. So this is the library website. It's always being tweaked, but I'm going to direct to a guide that I've created. And this is a standard, this is a company that creates this sort of guide making platform. So there are potentially millions of these guides created by librarians all around the world that just help organize. And so under industry and market research, that's where, I've sort of listed out these top hits. But if you go to, and I'm not going to dig all the way in here, but if you go to, Frost and Sullivan, it recognizes that we at Michigan State University, through some IP proxy verification, says, yes, you have access to these reports. You have access to this report on global solar PV services growth opportunities, for instance. But there's a few different report collection companies that we subscribe to. They have slightly different coverages. They're competing, and this is hard work to stay abreast of all these things. So, they're varyingly successful. But yes, this is a great place to start, and be aware of what you have through your institution. And I'm happy for us to talk more.
Yes, yeah, offline. I will really need to get back with you and need your help.
Great.
Like, for example, many of the people in GARD are interested in food or food safety.
Yeah.
So could you show an example here of food or food safety?
Right. Well, let's, start with, so we can take a look down here on the left-hand side and see, okay, is there anything in that space? And I'm not seeing anything that leaps off. And I wonder, okay, so I just wanted to check down here, because I know BCC research is going to be, have different coverage. Frost and Sullivan, different coverage.
Market, like that group market, or is
Yeah,
it
exactly right. Because so just looking through here, I see, okay, food and beverage, maybe that's a good place to start. And not all of those databases are going to have the same like really nice collected report, but let's see, and just see food safety and see what we get. So I'm seeing some good things, some bads here that, this is a really good hit.
Yeah.
But, it's from over 4 years ago now, right? So there are some limitations there, but we might use this as a starting point, right? And to give us a sense, and you nailed it, right? That if you find this on the internet, right?
That's 4,500 right there.
Yeah, right. But if we already subscribe to it, then you've got it here. So I just wanted to give a sense of what's going to be in this space, in these reports. Market size and growth of the market, but it's this gigantic market, right? Changing regulatory landscape. And once you get kind of, I can't go through here, but they talk about specific toxins by technology type. They break this down in lots of different ways. It breaks it down by geographies. And then it gives you these specific companies. And I've almost never come across this where people are looking at this and they're saying, okay, now I will read this entire thing. Usually for entrepreneurs, for technology transfer, there's going to be about 4 good paragraphs in this, 100, whatever it is, page report that are going to be relevant to you all, because you may already be so familiar with all of these different factors. Yes, so that is an example of something that we have access to through Michigan State University. And yeah, but of course there's a range of different databases with their different strengths and weaknesses. So it's very important to know what you have availability of. So I wanted to get to the second question. Are there ways to be in charge of the alerts. Often I find that sooner rather than later, there are often an overload of messages as alerts. Absolutely. You know, even for lens.org, I'm not quite sure whether or not they give you enough granularity to say like, hey, I'd love a monthly bulletin, you know. Please don't email me every single time somebody publishes something that's relevant in this space. And this is one of those reasons why I talked about perhaps even setting up a, you know, if you have an established sort of research organization, can I set up a simple email that is only for receiving these alerts? Or can I shunt them all into my other bin with your email? Or create a rule so that they go to a folder, and it's all about your workflows and what's going to work for you. But you may say, okay, I need those to go to a specific folder. So that they don't show up in my inbox and I can only go and look for them. But those are just some different thoughts on how to manage this. But I'm like you all, I'm signing up for things, I'm regretting it, I'm unsubscribing, but then there's some things that persist and I say, year on year, I'm going to keep that thing there because it's so relevant for me and my work. So that's a great question.
Thank you very much.
So from Huva, can entrepreneurship be hereditary? So one thing is that entrepreneurship really means so many different things, you know, and I think at its root, it's like people that really take ownership of bringing an innovation to people that can be impacted by it, right? So that, you know, sometimes people are entrepreneurs and taking ownership of, hey, I'm going to bring great pizza that is not of this area. I'm going to bring it to a new area, and there's a lot of risk. I don't know if this market wants this, but I'm going to work hard and I'm going to own that. And I think that basic model can be true for social entrepreneurship, you know, where you're motivated not just by the bottom line, but by other social factors. And I think one of those things that can be hereditary is, I don't think it's hereditary. I think that you can see the density of choices that need to be made, the different domains. Like if you see your parents, you know, working hard all day long, making choices all day long, and bringing you into the process of what they're doing to make all of those choices, and how they're working with people, how they're selling, how they're collaborating, how they're building. I think all of that, you know, models for people at a very early age, such that you see clusters of entrepreneurship where people are learning from each other, and it seems contagious. But I think it's contagious more like a meme, or a, you know, people model behavior for each other. So, but I'm also, I don't know how informed I am on the up-to-date research on that topic. Okay, we have.
Can I answer the question?
Yes, please go for it.
Yeah, so yeah, entrepreneurship can be learned. And I teach a class on entrepreneurial engineering for innovation in health and safety. So it can be learned. And those who ask the question can attend my lecture on tomorrow on entrepreneurship for scientists. That I will provide tips on how you can learn entrepreneurship.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, and I think that's great. And you know, part of what makes this community special, right, is it's a venue to do that learning in a way that's highly relevant for you all, because so much matters in terms of like the language that you use, and right, the registers that you're using. So as scientists thinking of how to become entrepreneurs, you're already using similar frames and registers. And so you can learn from each other. So I'm really happy for you all to work together and for you all to go attend Vanji's presentation tomorrow.
Yeah, so very typical. The unfortunate part is scientists are not taught how to be entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
So it doesn't, the entrepreneurship or entrepreneurial spirit is not cultivated.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why my lecture will be, how do you cultivate entrepreneurial spirit, entrepreneurial mindset, such that it affects your research becomes entrepreneurial, and then you have a product that adds value to society.
So another question in the chat, can you elaborate more on what a business model is and different types? So this is a great question because it's kind of indicating a gap in my presentation, right? I did not address this with any great detail. But your business model is, how are you creating value and delivering it to your customer? And there are so many factors and variables, but it's really those internal mechanisms, what are the resources you need to create the thing that to bring the value to the point where it can be delivered to the person, and then that person that it is a value proposition that they accept and that they're willing to spend money on or spend effort on or change their behavior on because they want to take that into their lives, right? And money is one way to sort of think about that, but even if it's going to be free, they're going to need to change their life, right, to bring this new thing in. And you could think about that as an end customer, but also a clinic, right? May need to change. They would need to say, why is this fit? Why do I accept this value proposition that's being proposed to me? So it's all of those different factors that involve creating the value and delivering it to your potential customer. And what are the different types of business model, as you're thinking about. So one of the things that I couldn't quite figure out the search terms for, but that I was interested in is there a business model for another form of super low cost, low resource diagnostics that is delivered to a rural healthcare setting in, someplace in a relatively low resource setting, right? So I'm sure that those business models exist, right? And I want to know what they are. And that could be some of the keywords that you might use there. It might be an open hardware solution, which has sort of implications around developing free intellectual property and letting many parties kind of create something. But my point is that you can different types of business models are going to have different keywords or different terminologies that try and sum up all of those different factors of the business model and how they're interrelating and how they're shifting. So it's kind of a big question. What a business model is how are you creating value and bringing it to your customer? But different types could be an open hardware model. It could be, pharmaceutical companies have a certain business model, and even within pharmaceutical companies, small drug manufacturers are going to be very different than big ones, and it'll look different in different countries. So the business model will shift in terms of the circumstances. Yeah, but the business model canvas, I think, is a great starting point for kind of learning more about and articulating your own business model.
Well, thank you so much for explaining that, Terrence. You have caught up with the Whova as I've been sending it to you. Does anyone have any more questions before we wrap up?
I just want to express our gratitude again to Terrence for such a wonderful presentation. Very insightful.
You're welcome. It's my great pleasure to join you all. I was looking forward to this, and I'm glad that we got to make it happen. And I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your conference.
Thanks, Terrence. This was great. We'll put this up on the Whova platform when we're able to get it on YouTube. So hopefully by the end of today. Thank you.
Great. Take care, y'all.
Bye, everyone.